remembered as the Jazz Age, the restless decade, the Roaring Twenties, the era of wonderful nonsense. But was it something more? A time of growing conflict between those who could accept change and those who would not. Between those whose minds were open to modern ideas and those who clung to fundamental beliefs. Between those who could accept the complexity of the 20th century and tried to cope with it, and those who rejected the new and tried to return to an America that was past. And in the struggle, America frequently became a battleground. November the 11th, 1918, a day of jubilation. The Great War is over. 2 million American soldiers begin the journey home. What sort of America did they leave? What sort of America will they find? What sort of America do they want? They left an America led by President Woodrow Wilson, spurred on by noble words to a great crusade to make the world safe for democracy. They had been plunged into the most bitter and bloody war in the history of man. A war that cost hundreds of billions of dollars and left over 8 million dead. Now they return to an America changed forever by the experiences of war. The country rejects world leadership and refusing membership in the League of Nations. It attempts instead to go its own way. The nation is granting women the right to vote. America goes dry and embraces a new Puritanism under Prohibition and the Volstead Act. It is an America in which some have gotten very rich from the war, but most have not. Working men are caught in the wartime inflation and the rising cost of living. A rash of strikes occur after the war. Strikes of steel workers seeking a reduction in the 12-hour day they work in the mills. A general strike throughout the entire city of Seattle. In the city of Boston, police find they can no longer support their families on a $21 a week salary. They strike for higher wages and petition to join a union. With the police on strike, the city is defenseless. Hoodlums have a field day. Widespread looting takes place. Governor Calvin Coolidge of Massachusetts says,
"There's no right to strike against the public safety by anybody, anytime, anywhere."
Coolidge brings in the National Guard. The strikers are fired. Almost a complete new police force is hired. In 3 days, the strike is broken. But these strikes and this agitation at home is connected in the public mind with the revolution taking place in Russia and threatening other countries of Europe. Is America itself in danger of a communist revolution? 2 small communist parties have been started in America. Their members are few. But Americans remember that a handful of dedicated Bolsheviks have overthrown the government of Russia. Fear leads to repression. Repression leads to greater violence. Bombs are found in packages mailed to John D. Rockefeller and other rich men. A massive bomb explodes inside a wagon on Wall Street. 30 people are killed and 100 hurt. The bomb has such force, it not only rips up the street, but wrecks the offices of J.P. Morgan and Company. No one knows who made the bomb, but to many Americans, this can only be the work of radicals. Attorney General Palmer rounds up known radicals, and even those innocently attending radical meetings. More than 5,000 people are arrested. and the government tries to deport some of them. College graduates call for the dismissal of professors suspected of radicalism. School teachers are forced to sign oaths of allegiance. Hysteria reaches a new high. Thus, in 1919, only a year after the armistice, America is no longer confident of saving the world for democracy, but afraid that the nation will be overturned by a handful of extremists. Americans are frightened by scare headlines and the growing wave of disorders sweeping the country. And if the police can't defend the public, other organizations will take the law into their hands. There is a resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan, which now begins to gain supporters even in the North. Masked figures parade openly on the main streets of northern towns and even in the nation's capital. Race riots break out in Washington, Chicago, and other cities. And with the Klan comes a rising wave of anti-Negro, anti-Jewish, anti-Catholic prejudice. In the climate of the times, foreigners and foreign ideas are suspect. There is a fear that hundreds of thousands of starving Europeans and Asians will immigrate to the United States to escape the suffering of the Great War. Harsh, new immigration laws are being enacted to exclude Asians and reduce the number of immigrants from Eastern and Southern Europe. The new policy rests upon the policy of Anglo-Saxon supremacy. After 2 decades of constant change, the country wants a rest. What it wants is best summed up by a Republican senator from Ohio, Warren Harding.
America's present need is not for heroics, but healing. Not revolution, but restoration. Not nostrums, but normalcy.
Back to normalcy. Printed in newspapers, the phrase sweeps the country. The senator from Ohio becomes the Republican candidate for president. And on March 4th, 1921, with an ailing Woodrow Wilson at his side, Warren Harding drives down Pennsylvania Avenue to become the new president. Seldom have 2 men been more different. Wilson, the visionary, the idealist, the man of great speeches and great crusades. Harding, the man who has no plan, no purpose, no mission, whose greatest desire is to be liked. Warren Harding takes the oath of office. The progressive era is over. America enters the age of normalcy. But what is normalcy? The word itself did not then exist. Is it modern industrial America with its huge steel mills and great dynamos moving confidently into the future? Or is it rural America? The America of comfortable, sleepy small towns, clinging to past values. The president himself describes the American small town where he grew up and says,
What is the greatest thing in life, my countrymen? Happiness. And there is more happiness in the American village than in any place on the face of the earth.
But the small town that Harding remembers is changing. The horse and buggy is vanishing, replaced by the automobile. Henry Ford's Model T sells for less than $500 within the budget of most Americans and is the prized possession of some families who can afford no other luxury. Ask why her family owned a car but not a bathtub. A farmer's wife replies,
You can't go to town in a bathtub.
Other women agree.
We'd rather do without clothes than give up the car. I'll go without food before I see us give up the car.
Will Rogers says,
Good luck, Mr. Ford. It'll take 100 years to tell whether you've helped us or hurt us. But you certainly didn't leave us like you found us.
New towns springing up along America's highways enjoy a new prosperity. The automobile is changing the manners and morals of young America. Young people now travel halfway across a state to attend a sporting event or dance. And on the way back, they can park, unchaperoned. Traveling through life faster than their parents, listening to the new invention, the radio, bringing new ideas and new culture. Seeing motion pictures glorifying defiance and rebellion, young people are in a ferment. Parents find themselves confronted by children who want to live faster, enjoy more, experience more deeply than their elders. It is a time of rising prosperity, but declining idealism. Many of America's most important writers, like F. Scott Fitzgerald and Ernest Hemingway, feel so cut off from their roots, their society, their country, they choose to live abroad. Gertrude Stein says of them,
"You are all a lost generation."
Writers who stay at home feel alienated too. Sinclair Lewis and H.L. Mencken express a growing dissatisfaction with the lack of direction and purpose in American life. In a changing America, President Harding finds his job immensely more difficult than he imagined. He complains to a friend,
John, I can't make a thing out of this tax problem. I listen to one side and they seem right. And then I talk to the other side and they seem just as right. God, what a job.
Unable to understand the problems that confront him, Harding ages in office, suffers a stroke, and dies. A small-town man who only wanted to be well-liked. He is genuinely mourned. But only a few months after his death, scandals in his administration are revealed. His Secretary of the Interior, Albert Fall, is convicted of having leased important naval oil reserves to men who gave him huge bribes. Yet the country is prosperous, and many people do not want this prosperity questioned or to see the confidence of the American people disturbed. The senators who reveal the Harding scandals are denounced. The job of the new president is to maintain prosperity and not rock the boat. Vice President Calvin Coolidge, who broke the Boston police strike in 1919, becomes president and says,
This is a business country. It wants a business government. The man who builds a factory builds a temple. The man who works there worships there.
It is felt that in this booming America, anybody who applies himself can become rich. The number of millionaires doubles. The automobile is stimulating other industries. Tires, paint, glass, nickel, steel, petroleum, and road building. Expanding use of electricity is creating labor-saving devices for the housewife, washing machines, vacuum cleaners, refrigerators. Housewives have more time to spend, and many of their husbands are earning more. Yet while the country continues to be prosperous, there are weaknesses in the economy. Much of the prosperity is based on easy credit and installment buying. More and more Americans are mortgaging tomorrow for what they want today. People gambling on the stock market risk their savings, hoping they can get rich quick. Meanwhile, the American farmer is suffering. Spurred on by wartime needs for huge crops, many farmers had borrowed money and taken mortgages to buy marginal land. Now there is no longer a demand for all the food that can be raised. More and more farms are being foreclosed. The president says,
The farmers never have made money anyhow.
And troubles at home are reflected by danger signals abroad. defeated Germany as a runaway inflation. In Germany, the mark becomes so worthless, it is used to paper walls or to light stoves. Riots start. These disturbances facilitate the rise of radicals and help the cause of an Austrian corporal named Adolf Hitler, who wants to overthrow the Versailles Treaty and restore Germany to her former power. In Italy, a fascist dictator, Benito Mussolini, has already taken control of the country. Meanwhile, at home, the split between those who accept modern America and those who want to return to the past widens. In 1925, the issue of the old fundamentalism versus the new science makes headlines because of a trial that takes place in a small town in Tennessee. Tennessee is one of several states that has passed a law declaring it illegal to teach the theory of evolution. A young teacher named Scopes determines to test the law. He teaches his biology class the theory of evolution. To the newspapers of America, this becomes the monkey trial. An attorney from Chicago, Clarence Darrow, comes to defend the science teacher. William Jennings Bryan, who rejects science and preaches a literal interpretation of the Bible, proudly agrees to help the prosecution. The courtroom is so hot, the judge sometimes moves the proceedings out of doors. In a curious carnival atmosphere, the trial reaches a climax. Clarence Darrow puts William Jennings Bryan on the stand.
Do you agree with most scientists that the world is millions of years old?
I agree with my Bible. The world was created in 4004 BC.
Do you say you do not believe that there were any civilizations on this earth that reach back beyond 5,000 years?
I am not satisfied by any evidence I have seen.
The trial underlines the split in America, but settles nothing. For another 40 years, it continues to be illegal to teach the theory of evolution in some states. While the Scopes trial has been going on, another case that will drag on for almost 7 years reflects America's suspicion of foreigners, anarchists, and agitators. In Dedham, Massachusetts, 2 Italian immigrants, Niccolo Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti, are on trial for their lives. The prosecution contends they are guilty of robbery and the murder of a factory paymaster. The defense says the men are innocent and are victims of the Red Scare that followed the war. To many intellectuals, this case becomes a symbol of unreasoning prejudice against people who are different. They work to free the immigrants, raise funds that continue appeals on the verdict for 7 years. After the men are executed in 1927, they quote Vanzetti, "If it not been for this thing, I might have died a failure. Now we are not a failure. Never in our full life could we hope to do such work for tolerance, for justice, for man's understanding of man, as now we do by an accident." The country is prosperous. America has 40% of the world's wealth. And there is a continuing search for new sensations, new thrills, like flagpole sitters. And new sports heroes, like Babe Ruth and Jack Dempsey. In 1927, the country finds the perfect hero in Charles Lindbergh. First man to fly the ocean alone in a single-engine plane, Lindy glorifies the new science of aviation that is making the world smaller and bringing men closer together. But at the same time, he personifies the old American values. He is a trailblazer, a pioneer in the tradition of Daniel Boone and the men who opened up the West. The continuing clash between the new and the old, the conflict between the big cities and rural America reaches its climax in the presidential election of 1928. The Republicans nominate Herbert Hoover, born of old-stock American parentage in a small town in Iowa. A self-made millionaire who was critical of Europe and a firm believer in rugged individualism. For the first time, the Democrats nominate a Catholic, Al Smith, born on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, a man who speaks in a raucous New York accent. Smith, of Irish descent, is not only the leader of the immigrant-based Democratic Party, but he is suspected of believing in racial equality. Unlike Hoover, he is for repeal of prohibition. Made a national law in 1920, prohibition has proved unenforceable. In an America that has 18,700 miles of border and coastline, there are fewer than 3,000 agents. Congressman Fiorello LaGuardia says that to enforce prohibition, the city of New York alone would need
250,000 police and another 200,000 to police the policemen.
The most respectable citizens frequent illegal speakeasies. There is a growing breakdown of respect for the law. Al Capone, the leading bootlegger and gangster of the day, says,
I call myself a businessman. I make money by supplying a need. If I break the law, my customers are just as guilty as I am.
Ironically, Capone is never convicted of the murders he and his gang commit. When he finally goes to jail, it is for not paying his income tax. Prohibition and prosperity are the key issues in 1928. Hoover is for continuing the noble experiment, and he promises a chicken in every pot and 2 cars in every garage. Smith carries the 12 largest cities in the nation. To rural America, he seems a symbol of the wicked city. Small-town, rural, Protestant, dry America is overwhelmingly for Hoover. He even carries some of the normally solid Democratic states in the South. As he takes office, Herbert Hoover says,
I have no fears for the future of our country. It is bright with hope.
But already, there are signs of danger ahead. Stocks are dangerously high, inflated beyond their true worth. Thursday, October 24th, 1929. The market is flooded by a sudden wave of selling orders. Stock prices drop. Millions of shares change hands. The result, a seller's panic. Friday and Saturday, things look a little better. But on Monday, when the market opens, there is another wave of selling. And on Black Tuesday, October 29th, the bottom drops out. Almost overnight, the value of stocks drops more than $50 billion. And with the bursting of the big bubble, some speculators commit suicide. Little investors have their savings wiped out. The shockwave from the crash rolls on and on. Many businesses are forced to close. National income drops to less than half. 1 out of every 4 farms is sold for taxes. By the end of 1930, there are 4.5 million unemployed. By 1932, there will be 13 million out of work. It was the end of an era that had begun with America rejecting world leadership. It was a time when the country became hysterical about foreigners, suspicious of anybody who was different. A time when many Americans tried to return to a world that no longer existed. It was a time when the country was prosperous. Much of the prosperity was based on easy credit and installment buying. But with the crash and the years of depression that followed came a new mood. The country did not yet have the answers to the problems it faced, but it knew it had to face them. What sort of America did they leave? What sort of America will they find? What sort of America do they want? They left an America led by President Woodrow Wilson, spurred on by noble words to a great crusade to make the world safe for democracy. They had been plunged into the most bitter and bloody war in the history of man. A war that cost hundreds of billions of dollars and left over 8 million dead. Now they return to an America changed forever by the experiences of war. The country rejects world leadership and refusing membership in the League of Nations. It attempts instead to go its own way. The nation is granting women the right to vote. America goes dry and embraces a new Puritanism under Prohibition and the Volstead Act, mental beliefs. Between those who could accept the complexity of the 20th century and tried to cope with it, and those who rejected the new and tried to return to an America that was past. And in the struggle, America frequently became a battleground. November the 11th, 1918, a day of jubilation. The Great War is over. 2 million American soldiers begin the journey home. It is an America in which some have gotten very rich from the war, but most have not. Working men are caught in the wartime inflation and the rising cost of living. A rash of strikes occur after the war. Strikes of steel workers seeking a reduction in the 12-hour day they work in the mills. A general strike throughout the entire city of Seattle. In the city of Boston, police find they can no longer It is remembered as the Jazz Age, the restless decade, the Roaring Twenties, the era of wonderful nonsense. But was it something more? A time of growing conflict between those who could accept change and those who would not. Between those whose minds were open to modern ideas and those who clung to fundamental